Spirits podcast, a boozy dive into mythology, legends, and folklore. Every week, we pour a drink and learn about a news story from around the world. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Julia.
And we are so excited to have a new friend, but I'm going to say a lasting friend. We have Chinenye with us. Welcome. Hello.
Thank you. Hello. Lovely to be here. Lovely to meet you, ladies.
We are so excited that you are here. We get a lot of pitches into the Spirits email for guests. And oftentimes, they're not great fits for us. I would say maybe 95% of the emails that we get for guest pitches are not ideal.
Usually it's like, this man has made a tequila. Do you want to talk to him? And then he's white and from the US and maybe a celebrity. And we're like, I don't think so.
Or it's like, this man has discovered that aliens built the pyramids. And we're like, sir, hard no. We don't want alien racism on our podcast. Thank you. But you sent in an email that we immediately were like, oh my God, yes, absolutely. We have to have you on. So before we get started about what we're going to be talking about today, can you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, my name is Chinenye Egbuna Ikwuemesi, and I'm a researcher into African history, into corrective African and global diasporic history. And I especially am concerned with the knowledge systems of Africa, including, of course, its mythologies, which contain several philosophies that helped to maintain their civilizations over millennia before colonialism and the rupture of slavery, etc. So that's my big thing.
Incredible. I'm so excited. We were talking a little bit about how you are looking to get into a PhD program to research this even further. So I'm really excited to dig into more about the things that you are researching. But before you do, I also want to mention the Afro Deities Institute, which you are the founder of. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
The Afro Deities Institute is a research institute looking into the corrective history of Africa. So we spoke very briefly earlier about erasure. So there is what I call the oral trap in African and global diasporic history. A lot of the history of Africa or of African and African descended people is either erased or if it's obscured. And if it's not, then it's misattributed with regards to its contributions, right? So I feel like that creates a lot of issues in what I call the Aphrodite's problem statement. And one of them is the identity of a lot of Black people everywhere, both in Africa and in globally, really, because there are many stereotypes, there are many biases, and they are really entrenched in the histories we're taught or not taught. They're entrenched in everything that we're exposed to. And I don't feel that there is a sufficient counter narrative, which happens to be the truth that is out there. And so the Afro Deities Institute works to uncover that information, make it legible again, and try to find avenues, decolonial curriculums, for example, to make this information clear and available to as many people as possible, because it's useful not only for Black people everywhere, but it's useful for other people who aren't Black to be aware of the contributions of Africans and people of African descent.
I love that you use that word corrective, because I think there is a sort of childlike thought about history that it is just the objective truth, that the things that are printed in textbooks or told to us in schools by people in positions of power are just what happened. I think one of the great joys for me of growing up has been realizing the agendas and the power differential and the history of history, right? Like that meta text. That word corrective to me just really uncovers the fact that, like, even what we think of as existing or neutral or canonical history, often written by, perpetrators, often written by the colonial and imperial forces in this specific instance, has its own project. And we need to correct the damage and the intent done by that project.
You're absolutely right. History has been referred to as the site of knowledge production, not actually as the site of keeping the history. So I'm looking at scholars like Achilles Mbembe, I'm looking at Mudimbe, Trujillo, and their view of the epistemologies is that there's epistemicide. A lot of it is actually killed off, not used, And a lot of history, as you said, what we call received history, is actually the site of a lot of severance from truth, severance from objective meaning, severance from other parts of the history that would give it the full objective meaning of that history, and therefore give you a clearer view of what the people were doing, who the people were, what they held dear, and make it easier to understand that there were massive, for example, engineering, medical, architectural innovations that were happening in Africa long before pre-colonialism. And my biggest issue, and part of the reason I'm running Aphrodite's, is that history doesn't begin at the severance for Africa. It doesn't begin at slavery. It doesn't begin at the colonialism. Africa was alive and doing incredible things long before. And there are a couple of big things I have. One is on Blacking Africa, which is that we believe Egypt is, it's been Arabized, but actually Kemet, is the original name of Egypt. But we think that the people that inhabited it didn't look like me, but they did. They weren't Persian or Greek or, some melding in between. There was a lot more going on. And then what you talked about, Amanda, the idea of the history that's given as though it's really what happened, I call that peremptorical history.
What does that word mean?
It means that it's peremptory. It means that it's history because somebody said so, not that it was history. It's going back to that idea as the site of killing off the real history and creating what was then passed on to all of us as history. And the bits that couldn't be hidden, that aren't hidden anymore, the whole thing just doesn't get taught. And so in order to unearth and expand that peremptorical history and expose it, I'm proposing a methodology to actually start doing that work. And I call that forensic historiography, right? So there's, just making frameworks, making tools that make it easy for people to understand this is what obscuration look like, distortions look like, and these are the tools that we can use over and over again to excavate those sites of erasure and obscuration.
I'm a little bit speechless because that is incredible work that you are doing. And just from my own personal experiences doing research as a person who studied history, can't call myself a historian, but a person who has studied history, the idea is often, especially at the base level, people will be like, oh yeah, I did research into history and I looked at this guy who for example, a European man who went to African tribes in the 1800s and then retold the stories that he heard. And people just take that at face value without actually looking into and looking critically at those sources and how they might have been influenced by this person's particular biases, or the fact that he is translating from native languages into English or German or what have you, and that clearly something is being lost in those translations. And incredible work that needs to be done in history nowadays is exactly what you were talking about. And so I'm genuinely kind of moved by this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think it is important work. And, honestly, I could talk about it all day as well, because it just creates so many harms. And I just love all those points that you made, Julia, with regard to, what are you basing some of your assumptions on? What are you using to define certain things? One of the things that drove me when I started looking at mythology and trying to understand why did it become demonized? So if you're African, you're going to recognize a couple of things about mythology in Nigeria. We either think that people that are interested in mythology and talk about the mythology are somewhat backwards. So we then take on ourselves the label of primitivism that was appended to us by, the academics and historians and things like that. People are worried about it because they think, well, no, it's evil spirits or it's paganism or something like that. And it's such a shame because there is just so much knowledge in all of it. For me, it's not about religion. Religion has got, it is a religion for a lot of people. That's what's wonderful about it. Candomblé. It's one of the connectives that we have for all of the Black people around the world is that they recognize the Orisha. They've done something with it. They've held on to some part of their history through it. So I'm not knocking it, but I'm not coming at it from a religious perspective. I'm coming at it from a perspective that says, why were they so afraid of the messages within these mythologies that they completely suppressed it? That's what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with people like Hegel saying that Africa is outside of history. Africa's ahistorical. And so we hold two truths in our head. One is Africa was the cradle of humanity. And at the same time, we hold in our heads Africa's ahistorical. It's a nonsense. How do we go from there to there?
It's just this really white European biases of history doesn't exist unless you write it down. And so it completely dismisses all oral histories that exist across the world. And it's so frustrating as someone who studies mythology and history to be like, no, these all existed before some Spaniards went to South America and started writing down native traditions. Like it existed beforehand.
Thank you. That was what I was referring to before, and I went off on a tangent. That's the oral trap. So the first part of the oral trap is oral traditions are primitive. They're backward. If it's not written down, it doesn't count. That's the first part of the trap. The second part of the trap that's truly brilliant is, well, Africa had an oral history. And so we can discount all of it happily now and go home because it's oral, can't be relied upon. Notwithstanding the fact that Africa had scripts, it had Giz, it had Tifina, it had Adinkra, it had Insibiti, it had so many scripts. It wasn't doing the engineering it was doing through orally doing calculus, right? It had script, it had maths, it had all these things. And so that entire oral history bit is another big part of peremptorical history. It's another big part of what we seek to excavate using the forensic historiography method.
It's also completely ignoring the fact that Europe also had a extremely strong oral tradition. And a lot of the European fairy tales that we know and love are only codified because of like the Grimm brothers writing down.
Brothers Grimm. Yep, that's right.
Exactly. So it is so frustrating that that's the view that a lot of historians, Western historians, I should specify, feel that particular way about oral tradition. And I would say, turn their noses up at it.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that's why it's important that you understand that oral trap, because it's okay that a lot of European history was oral until we had writing, because then there was writing. Then it was codified. And then we can start paying attention to it now. But Africa, we can keep it stuck with the oral traditions. And therefore, we don't have to acknowledge it. And one of the things I write a lot about is the fact that you can actually get a degree in classics. You can get a PhD in it. African history, African mythologies, African philosophy, everything is folklorized, right? There's never any meaning drawn from that. And I just feel like we all lose out on so much in that. We all lose.
So speaking to that point, can you tell us a little bit about what you refer to in the Aphrodite's Institute as the bridge works, ways that African civilizations have always and continue to encode and transmit knowledge? You write specifically on the Aphrodite's site across time, fable, griot, script, numbers, soil, and more. Would love to know something about these bridge works.
Oh, wow. Okay. That you're going to make my day. My point with the bridge works is exactly the point that all of us have been violently agreeing on here, which is that Africa is not ahistorical. Africa had history, right? Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that Africa had systems. It encoded its moralities, its law, its governance, its ethics. Anything that runs a society was encoded in a range of knowledge systems for the sole purpose of redundancy and resilience. And so that they couldn't imagine the rupture that came, but they needed to be able to pass information down. It needed to stay in a form that people could inherit it time after time after time. And what is amazing is that across Africa, very similar ideas were taking place with regard to how they actually encoded this knowledge through story, through transmission, through people like griots, through divination, through things like Ifa. And this is why the Orishas are so important, the study of them and the ways that they were maintained through the Babalawos and, the intermediaries. And Dogon cosmology has very similar worship modes and the way that information around that cosmology is held. So the idea of the bridge works is that all of African history you can actually look through and find connectives between all the different modes that they use to contain and keep the knowledge.
Archiving, right? Like we have a lot of archivists and librarians in this audience, and it sounds like they're archiving. As you said, they're making redundancies.
They're archiving, yes. So their archival systems were extremely strong, were extremely redundant. I mean, across so many modes. It wasn't just the idea of the bridge works. It's sort of showing the world Africa. For one of them is script. So like what I said to you, Africa had script, but also Africa had numbers, right? And this is what it did with numbers to try and keep the information with us. In the case of script, for example, Insibidi, if we look at Insibidi, is massively historically relevant and important because they kept a lot of information about lineages, about warfare, about governance, about how certain things were done, even secrets in those scripts. Although the rupture happened, my argument is if we go back and look at all the modes that they kept for memory, it's like the Egyptian per rank. Right. So I'm saying to you, across Africa, very simple things, very similar things are happening. So it's like the Per-Ankh house of medicine that the Egyptians kept. They made sure that all of their nodes of knowledges were kept in different sites across Egypt. The whole idea was, well, if one site is destroyed, the memory will survive somewhere else. The knowledge will survive somewhere else. And many African societies were doing the same thing through fable. The idea of story. The story wasn't just entertainment. It was encoding knowledge. Very important things. It's the idea that I want to give you this much information. I have to fit it on a chip this small. It's the idea that, okay, there's a binary way to actually encode information that gives us lots of options in terms of all the branches that information can take. And Ifa is something that someone had to memorize. They had to keep it in their heads. They had to learn it. They had to memorize it. They had to transmit it to another Babalawo to hold all that information. So again, when we go back to that idea that some people go, I don't want to do anything with mythology. It's religion. It could look like magic, what that Babalawo was doing, because you are looking at thousands of verses that have been memorized and used to work out optionality, to work out, well, if I'm in this situation, what decision do I make? All of that lives in the different forms of memory that Africans adopted and kept for the people coming. So that's what the Bridgeworks is about.
That's incredible.
Some ancient Roman writing down his favorite aphorisms and letters could never.
I think the sad thing about it is that there is just so much richness that we are all missing out on. If you just delve into any of it, you just kind of stand there going, really? Really? Why don't I know this?
Who kept this from me?
Even if it's just, the medicine aspect, I just written an article about when I had a cesarean section, and my daughter was calling my cesarean section scar. She called it my mummy zipper.
Oh.
And, she was saying, well, what would have happened if the cesarean section wasn't available? Long story short on this is that in the 1800s, somebody went from here to Bunyoro, somewhere that's now modern day Uganda, and found that they were doing successful cesareans and had been doing them for years with really reliably good outcomes. But you don't hear anything like that. That information, the knife that was used in that cesarean section is sitting today at the Welcome building here in London.
Of course it is.
If that's not an anecdote that describes the 19th and 20th centuries, I don't know what is.
He got the knife and he donated it to the Welcome collection, and it's sitting there, proof, and the whole story is there. Africans had medical knowledge; they were using it. They had ways to disinfect. They had ways to make sure that the mother survived, the child survived. They cauterized the wound. The woman recovered within 10 days. Mother and baby were fine. This information is It's there. It's just not taught.
If I can't think of the amount of like Regency novels in which they're like, you have to choose between the mother and the child. If you're like, I'm just so frustrated. I'm truly just so frustrated.
That was the mode here. But just think about it. Just think about how much we've lost. Just think about how much we don't know. Just think about what they might have known, that through all of this unnecessary suppression, we are losing people for the sake of. So they had that. They were doing it at the same time as, exactly as you say, they were making choices. It's the mother or the baby. And normally it was the baby. Let the mother die. Because as you know, a lot of people are not, it's a tough decision either way, but it doesn't always need to be that decision.
It's really just frustrating whenever something like this is laid out before me, before anyone really. The answer to the like, why didn't we know that we were able to do this? Because like they were obviously doing it in other places. And it's just like racism is the answer to that question, because they couldn't imagine non-white people being able to do things that Europeans hadn't figured out.
It's painful in the extreme. And your passion means so much to me on this, Julia and Amanda, I must tell you, because that's exactly how I feel. But can I tell you something? The reason I started the Aphrodite's Institute is I saw people like you in my head who saw and felt exactly what I feel once these things are revealed. I feel exactly the same thing. I don't know if you know about the Great Zimbabwe. It's the ruins that were built by the Shona people of Zimbabwe many years ago, hundreds of years ago. And, it's a feat of engineering. It's like, I'm sure you've heard about the Great Wall of Benin. It's very, very similar.
Her bread and butter.
My dad's a bricklayer. And so historical examples of stonemasonry are like our family's idea of dinner table conversation.
And your dad would have been really amazed, because they were laying bricks or things like bricks, like blocks. How they transported it is another miracle. That's another miracle we need to talk about another time. But how they built them was without mortar. And they stood for years and years. They were really fabulously strong, right? But when these ruins were found, let me make you laugh. They said, well, when I look that way and I look that way and I look over here, all I can see is Black people, African people. But it couldn't have been Africans that built it. Okay, so who built it? Oh, well, some white race turned up at some point, built it, and now they disappeared. Okay, so great. So where is all the evidence that you'd expect in the soil or somewhere that these people lived? Oh, we don't have any, but it couldn't have been Africans. They went as far, and I'm not kidding you, as suggesting it had to be aliens.
Listen, we already talked about racist alien stuff and how we don't have those people on our podcast.
I don't know, man. If dismantling racism and unlearning for me as a white person, white supremacy, because it is the right thing to do, is not enough, man, is it limiting. Like you really said it. It is limiting. You miss out. You look dumb, and you miss out on the feats and beauty of like the world around you. Like imagine being so limited and stuck in the viewpoint. I don't have to imagine it because it exists all over the place. That good ideas and history and progression and linear progression and capital accumulation and all of that is the work and responsibility of white men. Just clinging so hard to that you make the insane leap, the logical leap under white supremacy that, oh, well, it must have been aliens. It must have been historical. And it must have been Atlantis. Whatever it must have been. It surely cannot be people who look different to us that we can learn something from.
It is such a shame.
Luckily for us, we have you here to help us start unpacking some of those wonderful knowledge systems. And after our break, I would love to get into the story that you are bringing to the fore today, all about the Orisa.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
Hey, everybody, it's Amanda. Welcome to The Refill, where I am so excited to report that Chinenye and I have since had lunch and drinks, and I met her beautiful family and kids. She's amazing. So I am so excited that you are hopefully enjoying this episode as much as we did. I would like to thank very much as we close in on episode 500. We're so close. Thank you to those of you whose support on Patreon means that we can keep doing this show. Without you, we couldn't. And if you like this show and you want it to stick around, there's two really important things that I would like for you to do. Number one is, I want you to text somebody who should listen to Spirits. It might be your coolest cousin. It might be your old babysitter. It might be a person you went on a date with and you want them to think you're cool. And so you send them a cool podcast that you love. Text them the link to spiritspodcast.com. Send them one of our reels on Instagram or YouTube. I would love to get new listeners in here for the 500th episode and beyond. And secondly, if you have a little bit of money to spare, I would really appreciate your support over on Patreon. We are doing something very special for episode 500 for our patrons. That's all I'll say. So if you go to patreon.com/spiritspodcast, you can join folks like Lynn and Zoe, who have become our newest paying supporters over the last week. I noticed, by the way, that one of you has done the annual plan. You get a big discount if you support us for a whole year right up front on the annual plan. Thank you. And thank you to our supporting producer level patrons, Alicia, Hannah, Scott, Ann, Matthew, Lily, and Will, and our legend level patrons, Captain Jonathan, Malachi, Cosmos, Audra, Sarah, BM Scotty, Morgan, Rico Like, Chibi Yokai, and Smoliv. All of that and more, patreon.com/spiritspodcast. I was recently talking to somebody who mentioned that they had a crush on a medievalist. And I said, oh, do I have the podcast for you? And that show is American Medieval, which is a podcast about the Middle Ages, but with a uniquely American twist. Professor Matthew Gabriel is joined by an expert scholar each week to talk about the medieval world itself and how Americans throughout our history have used the Middle Ages to say something about ourselves. America has never been fully modern. We've always been a little bit medieval, and I guarantee you are going to learn something about swords or medieval life or history and how we think about it, or American identity and how we think about ourselves and try to build us up as a sort of like outside of Europe, but in the tradition of Europe kind of nation. It honestly has made me think so hard about all of those topics and more. And it is a ton of fun to listen to, edited by our very own Julia. So go on over into your podcast app, which I know you're in right now because you're listening to my voice. Type that little search bar, write American Medieval, and you can check it out every single Wednesday. A wonderful chaser to spirits.
We are back, and one of the things that we love to ask each and every one of our guests is, what have you been drinking lately? Whether that is cocktails, mocktails, coffee creations, what has been your drink of choice?
There you go again, running around inside my head, Julia. You're going to need to stop it today. So you've mentioned all my favorite things. I love cocktails. I make cocktails. People turn up at my house for cocktails.
Yes.
But I was just really I just don't want to drink any alcohol and things like that. And I've just sort of given it up for a bit. I found out that if I put fresh basil leaves and put appetizer, do you guys have appetizer in America?
No.
I feel like I've heard of that before, but we don't have it.
Oh, you poor things. You absolutely... Oh,
I know.
That's the biggest problem you've got at the moment, obviously, in the States, is that you haven't got appetizer.
At time of this recording, absolutely the worst problem we have right now in our country.
Oh, nice.
So I think appetizer is supposed to be like apple juice and then they've carbonated it.
Oh.
But it's really, really good, right? So it's appetizer. I put basil leaves, loads of basil leaves, obviously wash them, put them in. And then some bottle green pomegranate. What is it? What's pomegranate and something? I can't believe it's run out of my head. It's like a cordial. That is a mocktail from heaven. That's it. I don't need anything else. That's what I've been drinking. I'm addicted. It's absolutely fantastic.
I am a huge fan of basil in cocktails, so that sounds so good.
I'm having one every day. Don't tell anyone.
Yeah, we won't tell anyone you're having some fruit juice and herbs. That's certainly terrible for you.
It's all that sugar. It's all that sugar. I'm ashamed of myself.
You'll have to come up with a good name for it so that when we share a version of that with our listeners, you have already dubbed it a perfect name.
I will. I'll come up with something.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Incredible. So we've had a fantastic discussion about history and issues that arise because of Western influence on African history and how it's studied. I want to now turn to African mythology, but specifically Nigerian mythology, because I know that is your specialty. And you had suggested a particular story when you were pitching coming on the show. And I would love to hear about it.
Right. Okay. So I sent you a pitch about the Orisha who broke the universe and then put it all back together again. So that's a story about Obatala, the king of the white cloth in Yoruba cosmology. And it's basically me giving Obatala an origin story from my imagination. So it's got the core tenets of the original story, the original myth, which is a very important one in Yoruba cosmology. But I just like giving these Orishas an interior life. And that's what I've done with this one. So I wanted to tell it to you.
Before we get started, just for our listeners who might not be as familiar with Nigerian mythology in general, can you give us a more specific definition of what an Orisha is?
Right. Okay. So you asked two questions in there. I'm not sure if you know. I'm gonna do this. The first one. Nigerian mythology is really broad, right? So the Yoruba mythology is one of the biggest landscapes, but Nigeria has over 200 unique ethnic groups, and they all have their own mythologies. The Edo, for example, and the Yoruba, they have quite similar stories, but they also have great differences. In the Yoruba mythology, to answer that question, the Orishas are the deities they're the Yoruba deities. They are gods of creation, Olodumare, Oduduwa, Obatala. They were originally worshipped by the Yoruba people a long, long time ago. They represent morality. They represent law. They represent ecological protection and preservation. They represent balance in the way that humans, interact with each other in rightness and in the right way, and also the way that they interact with their environment, the way that they protect their environment. They represent hierarchy in terms of its people before property. They represent a philosophy of knowing and being. So that this idea of balance, I actually represent it in my writing as mathematics. I call it the mathematics of social harmony. So you think it's balance and you think, oh, it's some kind of, fuzzy-wuzzy, hocus-pocusy stuff. Yeah, it's absolutely not. It's ways that people were able to maintain their environment, resolve disputes, and atone when they had either done something wrong against somebody else or against their people at large or against the deities. And so the Orishas are a civilizational wrapper, in my view, to the Yoruba culture.
See, I'm so glad I asked that question now.
Right. So Obatala has, I think, a stunning story. He's known as the king of the white cloth. And like all of the other Orishas, he has worship modes. There's ways you approach him. There are certain things that you bring as offerings. A lot of his story is lost in Nigeria, in the home of Yoruba. Some people still have it. The story, the traditions around the Orishas, especially Obatala, is greatly elevated in the South Americas, in Brazil. They have real religions based on these Orishas. And that's where Obatala, I think that's the reason why, even if you don't know anything about the mythology, most people will have heard something about Obatala. He's really, really important. I initially wrote about him in almost as part of a compendium, but then I decided to just write more of an origin story about him because I thought it was interesting. He was tasked to do a job and then kind of didn't do well. And in Yoruba mythology, it shows that either he or his brother did the job. So the reason for my story was trying to really work out that tension in the story and make it make sense.
I'm so excited to hear the story.
Hit us with it.
Okay. So Obatala is an Orisha, a deity known as the king of the white cloth. And that's more than a title. It's a cosmological, because white in Yoruba means sacred understanding. It's not an absence of color or emptiness. It is everything that has not yet been decided. It denotes purity, yes, but also possibility and mercy. Also, the particular quality of a God who has been through something and come out the other side of it still wearing white. And I want to tell you his story. Obatala had already failed once. Olodumare, the supreme being, had looked across the heavens and chosen him to go down and begin the work of creation. He was given what he needed, a sacred bag, and inside it, a shell of sand, a white hen, and a single palm nut. He was trusted with that first act of making. He did not complete it. The heavenly nectar was there, and it was sweet. It was an appetizer, but it was sweet. And he drank and he slept. And while he slept, his younger sibling, Oduduwa, took the job Obatala had been given. And so Oduduwa made the first world. And it was extraordinary in its way, structured, pure, a world of perfect form, land and sky and water placed with precision, crystalline, flawless, complete. But it was sterile. It was a blueprint. It was the bones of a world without its flesh, though, without color, without anything that breathed or grew or moved through it. Oduduwa had made a canvas of existence, a performance of world, not a place of and for existence. Yes, it was breathtakingly beautiful, but it was still and hollow. It had not yet been made a place worth existing in. So Olodumare regarded it. And then he looked at Obatala, and Obatala looked back. And after some time, Olodumare said, go and finish it. And this was his second chance. And he knew it. Every god in the heavens knew it. He came down, that golden chain, carrying the full weight of what it means to be trusted again after you have already failed. So imagine that golden chain descending from the sky. Obatala comes down slowly. He is deliberate. He is careful. He is the opposite of who he was the first time. He has the sacred bag against his chest. He can see Oduduwa's world below him as he descends. The perfect crystalline world, still silent, waiting. He reaches the end of the chain and something breaks. Whether it was the weight of what he carried literally and figuratively, or the distance, or the precise angle of impact at which he tilted on the end of the chain, the shell of sand falls and strikes Oduduwa's perfect world. The shock wave from it shatters everything Oduduwa built. The crystals crack as far as the eye can see. And beyond, the perfect single tone fractures into millions and millions of fragments. The unified, pristine first world breaks apart into pieces. Obatala lands in the wreckage he has made of his brother's work. He has broken the universe, literally, physically. That world that existed is just gone. He sits in the silence of what he has done, but he doesn't run. That's important. That's important because it's a theme. He looks at the fragments around him, the broken pieces of the first world, and he picks one up. It's dark now, irregular, dull, nothing like what it was before. Batala closes his eyes in a brief despair. He opens them again and he begins. Now, he does not try to restore what was. He cannot. Perfection, once it is broken, does not reassemble into perfection again. It can only reassemble into something else. So he takes the fragments and he works. He plants the palm nut and watches it grow. He pours the sand and releases the white hen, and she scatters it across the broken ground. And where it lands, the earth rises up in ways it never rose up in Oduduwa's world, not flat and ordered, uneven, rich, mountains where the depth allowed them, and valleys where it did not. And then he plants. He plants because the people he has not yet made will need shade and food and beauty. He plants because covering the cracks is the only thing he can do. And so he does it as well as he can imagine. Thinks it and he makes it. He thinks it and he makes it. He thinks it and he makes it. Tree after tree, root after root, going down into the fractured ground. Flowers finding fissures and growing from them. Riotous, luminous colors appearing everywhere, where before there had been no color. Then he makes the light trees, tall, luminous, their canopies catching whatever light existed in the new world and holding it. And they will redistribute it. And they will make the coming darkness of night, which has not yet arrived in the world, navigable. Inside of each one, embedded in the heart of the tree itself, in the grain of the wood on the inside, he placed the pulsinors, the force that would make them pulse, that would make them breathe, that would make the light trees not merely luminous, but alive in a way that went beyond what any tree had a right to be. And so even if you cut it down, as long as they grew, the pulsinors would be within them. He made wood spirits to tend the canopy, guardians of ecological balance, each one bound to a grove, responsible for what lived in them and under them and because of them. They did not yet have names or stories. They were new and they knew it. One of them stood at the edge of the first light tree grove and looked up into the canopy of Jove and understood without being told that this was the thing he had been made for and to protect. He didn't have a name yet, but he would earn one later in a story that had not yet begun. The world was filling now, and with the living things came the small, invisible things that live between them, necessary and dangerous in equal measure. Obatala understood this, that the same earth that grew the food would grow the illnesses. So before he made the people, he made the medicine trees, one in every grove, dark leaves, strong bark, and a sharp, earthly smell to keep off what would degrade the medicine, insects and the like, before it could be used. He had not even made the humans yet, and he was already thinking about their fevers. He loved these humans he was about to make. He already loved them. He wanted everything right for them. He wanted the world to be ready. But it wasn't time. Next, he made the creatures. The early ones were practical. Birds to carry seed, insects to carry pollen, the small necessary population of a world that intends to sustain itself. He made the ladybug. Small, round, perfect, red with black spots first, then gold with black, then red with gold, the colors of fire at different temperatures, then blues that caught the light like the inside of a shell, then silvers, then combinations that we didn't have any names for, still probably don't. He kept making them, each one a variation, a God discovering that beauty has no ceiling, and that you can always find one more combination that makes you put your head back and laugh in delight. He made the firefly because somewhere in the loosening imagination of a God who had already made trees that carried their own life, their own light, the idea arrived. What if a creature could do the same? What if something small and living could make its own brightness in the dark? He made the giraffe. He had made the palm tree and then looked up at it and thought, something needs to be able to reach near the top of that. And that is how the giraffe arrived. Utilitarian magic, creation answering its own questions. He made creatures we no longer have names for, beings that existed in that first flush of divine creative excess and were lost somewhere in the long millennia since. And his hands, each time they shaped a female of any species, went purple. That was how fertility was passed on and in. The purple hands pressed into the clay or the substance the creature was being made from, and the capacity to bear life went in with that touch. He didn't think about it. It happened the way that breathing happens. The hands went purple, the fertility entered. And then he thought, it's ready. Let me make the humans. He found a riverbank. Of course, he found a riverbank. He needed clay. He knelt down. He reached into the earth and took the clay in his hands, and he began to shape the pliant clay. This is the moment to slow down inside. There isn't any blueprint for making a human being. Olodumare had given him the task, but not the instructions. He was making decisions in real time. He hadn't worried so much when he was making the creatures, but he was really wanting to do his best work when he was making the humans. This curve here, this length here, these hollows for eyes, this cavity for breath. He was building something that had never existed, and he was doing it from the broken, beautiful, imperfect earth he had made from the fragments of his brother's world. The people would be made of this. Broken crystal become rich soil and clay, of fractured perfection become living color. He worked for a long time. He sang as he worked. There is always a song in Yoruba creation. The voice is never separate from the making because song comes from the soul, and so does making. He shaped one beautiful human, and then another, and then another. He lined them up, these clay forms, waiting for Olodumare to breathe life into them. Obatala was the form. The breath belonged to Olodumare alone, the supreme being. Obatala had not yet made the clouds, though. They were still to come. He had wanted to work outside of time because that way he would be in the sunshine only. This meant the day had no end to it. The sun that Oduduwa had placed in the sky did its work diligently, without interruption and without relief. Obatala had been working in that relentless light since he arrived. He found himself tired and could not remember ever feeling tired. It happened that when the different orishas overlapped on the creation work, initially meant for one orisha, and the creation of one started with the destruction of the past one, a fissure, a divine fissure appeared that spawned consequence. Consequence spawned spirits. With the creation of humanity that Obatala was engaged in, these spirits found expression, which allowed them to gain voice, will, and desire.
Are the spirits human souls?
The spirits are consequence. The humanity was a gateway for them to come into the world, but they're not human souls, no. One such spirit, cloaked in mischief, approached Obatala as he rested in the shade of a tree, offering him a gourd of palm wine.
Uh-oh.
Oh, great Obatala. Surely a god as mighty as you, having performed such exploits in the service of the Supreme Being, who is very, very pleased with the work you have done, it should be said, he intoned with authority. Surely such a god deserves refreshment, he finished slyly. The spirit had not been there when Obatala descended, and the spirit itself barely knew what he was. But he had been watching since the moment he arrived, standing at a distance, observing this god working in the endless heat of the endless day. And he was fascinated by everything that he saw. Where have you come from? A quizzical Obatala asked him. The spirit considered this. Lord Oduduwa left me here, he said. And then before Obatala could pursue it, the work you have done, it is so different from what this place was. You have opened doors that were not here before. Obatala looked at him, looked around, saw nothing that explained him. He wasn't a wood spirit. He was also almost sure that this spirit had no idea what was there before. But the spirit was already talking about something else. You must be thirsty.
This spirit being like, I was just born.
Yes.
Already causing mischief. Love it. So into it.
Consequence. You must be thirsty, the spirit said. All this work. Olodumare himself must be watching and thinking, he deserves something. There is a stream yonder, Obatala said, raising his hand to ward off the temptation. I will drink when I am finished. The spirit said nothing and let him continue to work. A little while later, he pipes up again. You made that palm tree, that first one. You put it in the world yourself. Surely, the first taste of what it gives should go to the one who made it. Peradventure, you have made divine nectar. It's something the earth can carry. Palm wine, if you will. No, Obatala said, I will not. I know that road. I've been down it. The spirit nodded, said nothing more, let him work. Then suddenly, a gourd by his side held out, smelling of every good thing that had ever been or would ever be. He sniffed. The spirit said, just a sip for the work. Anyone looking down from the heavens would say you deserve it. Obatala looked at the gourd. The gourd looked at Obatala. The incredible scent of it called all his divine names, but he knew the cool water was within reach and made to stoop to it. How strong could it be, said the spirit. It isn't a tree. It is not what it was before. Sip. Obatala, now primed to drink something, took a sip. The spirit said nothing. Let the sip become a second. Obatala went back to his work. By and by, the spirit said, the work you are doing now looks even finer than before. Obatala said, I'm having no more. The spirit went quiet. Then suddenly again by his side, the gourd. He took a sip. He finished it, carried on working. Then another gourd. Then another. The spirit talking this whole time, praising, flattering, finding every gap between one human form made and the next to offer something sweet.
We've all had a happy hour like this.
I know, it's giving open tab that you should have closed. I get it.
Somebody should have closed it. Obatala, tired, working in the endless heat of a sky without clouds. Well, he drank far more than he should have, far more than he meant to. But he thought the world was almost made and its creatures and the people-to-people creation, he was almost done. The division of labor between Obatala and Olodumare was absolute. Obatala made the forms. Olodumare breathed life into them. The forms came, the breath entered. The forms came, the breath entered. Olodumare didn't inspect each form before breathing. That was not his part of the covenant. His part was the breath. Obatala's part was the form. Each trusted the other completely. And so while Obatala's hands were no longer quite steady, while the palm wine was running through that body and finding the same weakness it always found there, Olodumare breathed into the steady forms and into the unsteady forms that were becoming. He breathed alike into the forms Obatala had made before, palm wine, and the forms he made after. And so, crooked limbs, clouded eyes, twisted spines, the breath entered them all. Deeper into the day, there were moments when, as he was making the female forms, the purple did not come into Obatala's hands. When his hands moved through the making and he forgot, a female was completed without fertility. She would be whole in every other way, but that one thing would not be in her. He did not know in those moments that he had forgotten. He didn't spot that he wasn't purple. He was already moving to the next one. By the time Obatala sobered, every form on that riverbank was already alive. And he looked at them. He was amazed at their beauty. And he looked at them, all of them, every single one. And then he spotted the ones he had made after the gods. And when he spotted the ones he had made after the gods, he did not look away. He did not tell himself it was not so bad, that perhaps nobody would notice. He did not tell himself that there were a few amongst many. He looked at every living person on that riverbank and he saw exactly what his hands had made. We need to sit in that moment with him, sit with what that moment costs. This was not a small mistake. These were existences that were impacted by how he had fashioned them. This was not something that could be apologized for and moved past. He was a God who was given the task of making humanity, who had already been given a second chance after his first failure, who in the central sacred moment of his entire existence was undone by something he himself had made, and who now stood looking at living people whose bodies would carry the consequence of that moment for the rest of their lives. He could not have looked away, because to look away would mean to say that these people did not matter enough to be looked at, and that was the one thing that he would not do. He didn't blame the relica, the spirit of consequence. How could he? The spirit was a child of consequence, born from the overlap of divine acts. It was new to existence, and he had offered him a thing without necessarily understanding what it meant. And the palm tree was Obatala's own. He had made it. He had planted it. He had put it in the world. And the world had done what worlds do with the things you put in them. He sat with what he had done, and then he made the vow that he is known for. From this day, every person made with a body that the world will call different, every person born into a form that carries the mark of that day at the riverbank, every person whose limbs do not move the way the world expects, whose eyes do not see the way the world expects, whose spine curves in a direction the world did not plan or account for. These are mine, not as a burden, not as an act of guilt being worked off across eternity, not as charity, as a covenant. I made them. I made them with these hands at this riverbank on this day. And because I made them, they are under my protection. They are sacred to me specifically, personally, permanently, with the full weight of everything I am. That was his vow. Obatala became the patron Orisha of people with disabilities, people with albinism, people with any physical or psychological difference. His priests wear white. When you bring an offering to some gods, you may bring palm wine, but never to Obatala, not ever, not once, not a drop. The god remembers what he did. And the chain, the golden chain that broke when he descended, the connection between the divine realm and the human world that was severed in the moment of impact, well, Obatala became that bridge. not a restored change, something better, a God who lives in permanent relationship with the people on the other side of the break, through his priests, through his ceremonies, through the white cloth that his devotees wear, through every person who calls his name. He is the bridge now because he broke the original one. His purity is not despite what he did. It is expressed through that vow that he made when he saw what his hands had done. So here is what I want you to take from this story. Obatala did not make a beautiful world by trying to make a beautiful world. He made a beautiful world by trying to fix what he had broken. The color came from the repair. The variety came from the fragments. The proliferation of beauty, the thousands of species, the flowers growing from the crack, the rich dark soil from shattered crystal, all of it came from one God covering, ameliorating the damage that he had done as well as he knew how. And then looking up and finding out that he'd made something more extraordinary than anything that could have existed. And the same is true of the people. When he looked at them, all of them together, the ones made with steady hands and the ones made after, he did not see the ones he made after as lesser. He saw them as part of the same world, made from the same broken, beautiful earth, shaped by the same hands, carrying the same spark that Olodumare breathed into all of them without distinction. They had their own separate beauty, their own separate magic, their own separate sacred things to do in a world that was itself made from broken pieces put back together. Same hands made them. That's not a consolation. That is a cosmological fact. Obatala's vow is not charity, it's recognition. He made them, they're his. And his purity, his white cloth, is not the purity of someone who never made a mistake. It's the purity of someone who looked at every consequence of every mistake he ever made and said, those are mine. I'll not look away. So Obatala in Yoruba cosmology represents a relational God, one who's been through something, much like Babalu Aye, a God who understands you not from a distance, but from inside of an experience that cost him something real. A God whose purity was not diminished by his failure, but was expressed through his response to it. He put the palm wine down. He never picked it up again because he understood what it cost last time and the time before that. And he loved it all. He loved all that he had made far too much to risk it all again. Obatala, the king of the white cloth, broke the universe and built something more beautiful from the pieces. And he has never stopped paying attention to the people he loved.
Now, before the podcast started, you said, oh, please don't make me cry before we start recording. And now I'm fully crying during a recording. So that's cool and great. And oh my God.
I'm ready to pour out a mocktail for Obatala and get some of those beautiful leaves from the herbs that he made.
Yeah, that was an incredible, beautifully told story. Thank you so much. I genuinely don't, as Amanda said, don't have anything more to add. Where can people find you and your work online?
Oh, that's so kind of you. I'm so glad that you liked that story. Thank you so much. My work, you can find it on the afrodeities.org website. And Afrodeities is spelled AFRODEITIES.org. It's also in all good stores, in good bookstores all around the world at the moment. The first book is called Nigerian Mythology, The Shadow Sky, and a précis of this story is in there. The second book is called Meet the Orishas, and that's where I've given a lot of the Orishas an origin story like this one.
And people can find links to you, your books, the Aphrodeities Institute, et cetera, in the description of this podcast. So anywhere that they can find you, they can find a link to that as well. And thank you again so much. This was absolutely beautiful. Both an incredible conversation and an incredible story. And we are so grateful that you sent us an email.
Oh, I'm so grateful that you read it, but I'm the most grateful that you enjoyed it. I think that you are such gracious hosts and you'd be kind to me anyway, but I really hope that you mean it and that you loved it that much. But I'm so grateful to you.
Genuinely was moved to tears several times during the story. So,
oh, wow. Thank you.
Folks, next time you feel like there is a rupture in the divine chain linking you to the heavens, just remember that you've got some good company.
Stay creepy.
Stay cool.
Later, satyrs.